Hello, everyone, and welcome to Monsoon Awareness Week 2017. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this live hangout. I am glad that you could join us. We're going to be talking about today. It's kind of an introductory day. I've got an esteemed panel joining us, as you can see across the bottom there, and we're going to be talking about in the Southwest, the threats related to the monsoon, and anything else that comes to mind monsoon kind of related. We do want to answer any of your questions. So if you have a question, you can hit the YouTube chat that you might be seeing there, or you can tweet us on the Twitter. And using the hashtag you can see there in the bottom of my my lower third there, it's Monsoon Awareness Week 2017. So that's hashtag MAW 2017. So we are really excited. We've done these for a couple of years, and we find that they're a great way to outreach to our communities. This involves, top of my head, but it's at least 6 or 7 weather forecast offices across the Southwest U.S. Let me see if I can name them up. Albuquerque, Tucson, Phoenix, and San Diego and Las Vegas. So I think that was 7. We are all joining together because we want to help you prepare and be safe for the monsoon season, because as we get into things here, we'll talk about the different threats related. And then each night this week, we're going to, at the same time, we're going to be talking on one specific threat of the monsoon season. So we're going to kind of cover them all today in general speaking, and then each night this week, Monday through Friday, we're going to hit threats of the monsoon season. So let me introduce everybody here as I run down the line here. We've got from El Paso at the weather office is Miss Marissa Pazos. She's a forecaster there. Then over in Tucson is, oops, let me click, is Miss Jordan. Almost said your name wrong. So thank you, Miss Jordan, for joining us. Over in the Phoenix office, joining us tonight is Jarrett Rogers. How are you doing tonight, Jarrett?
Pretty good.
Very good. And finally, from the Flagstaff office, the big kahuna there himself, the MIC, is Brian Klimowski. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us.
Very good. I'm so glad that you could join us as well. Okay, let me grab back control here of everything. Doop. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Tim Bryce. I'm a forecaster in the El Paso office along with Marissa. So it's Monsoon Awareness Week. We live in the Southwest. We know it can be hot. We know it rains during the summer. But exactly, hey, Brian, can you kind of define for us or kind of tell us what is the monsoon?
Oh, you bet. Well, the monsoon is my favorite time of year. Okay, it's what we see during the monsoon is basically a change in the wind direction. The word monsoon means a seasonal change in wind direction. And that's what we see in these parts late June, early July. Essentially what happens is the desert Southwest heats up. Okay, it heats up so much that it forms what we call a thermal low in the desert Southwest, basically driving a wind change, which normally might be from the west or southwest, which is a dry wind direction for us, to the south or southeast, which is very moist. It always happens. We see it like clockwork, typically starting in late June in New Mexico and areas south of us, hitting Arizona and our neck of the woods in early July. But many locations in the Southwest United States see about half of their annual precipitation come from the Southwest monsoon that happens every year.
Wow. So, like you said, I think a lot of people associate the monsoon, they think it's related to thunderstorms. But it's actually, by definition, it's that seasonal wind change that happens. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And it's that wind change that is what's responsible for bringing in that moisture, either from the Gulf of California for Arizona, or for the Gulf of Mexico and Gulf of California and Pacific Ocean for New Mexico. So, hey, Miss Marissa, I got a question for you. about the monsoon season here in the Southwest U.S. Does the monsoon season occur anyplace else?
It does. Very good question, Mr. Tim. So the monsoon actually occurs in Asia, Australia, North and South America, Africa, all across the globe, actually.
Wow. So, I think a lot of people are familiar with it occurring in, let's say, like the Southeast Asia, but where else did you say? Africa?
Africa, North and South America, which we already know. Australia even has a monsoon. I was trying to see if I could find pictures of the Australian monsoon, but not so lucky yet. Let me see what I can do. But yes, even
okay, you
Asia.
dig around. Very good. And I guess that makes sense. As Brian was saying, you need that big landmass that starts heating up during whatever the summer is, because, of course, summer down in Australia would be our winter. But you heat up that landmass, and that starts that big low, that big kind of, I look at it as like a vacuum cleaner. It starts to pull in moisture into it. And that's where you start to get all that moisture. And then the moisture is what fuels these thunderstorms. Now, I did get a question already on the YouTube chat, and that's from Powell. And he or she is asking any indication how the early phase might unfold for this year. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot. Or can we have an idea of how monsoon's going to start, when that monsoon flow is going to begin? Or is it just one of these things that we kind of see it maybe about a week out when it starts to happen? Anyone want to grab that? Oh, I'm hearing crickets.
I can talk.
Oh, okay, yay. Go ahead.
Yeah, typically throughout the monsoon, even though it's defined as a season, there are still cycles within that season where it's more active and when it has quieter periods. So it's not a consistently active period of time. I think, at least trying to look for the onset of the monsoon, it's not something that we can necessarily predict more than a couple weeks out, but one thing that we are seeing here in the next week or so is we are seeing the building of that really strong high pressure higher up in the atmosphere, which is going to result in a lot of heat, especially in the Southwest. So when we start to see that, that's really the first indication that we're starting to see the summer patterns start to become entrenched. And once we see that high become established over the Southwest, after that happens, then we can start to look for more signs of the monsoon. So if that stays pretty persistent, then it may not be more than a couple weeks out before we start to see the first intrusions of moisture into the Southwest. So it at least looks like there's some hope that we may see it in the next couple weeks, but still hard to say exactly when.
Very good. Now, back to you, Jared. You mentioned the heat. That's one of the threats associated with the monsoon season. And I don't think people realize how important and how deadly heat can be, especially, like you said, at the beginning of the monsoon season. But when we take a break from the monsoon flow, the heat can return. What are the threats related to the monsoon season?
Yeah, heat is probably one that's the most persistent throughout the monsoon. Phoenix is a very large city. It's the 5th largest city in the U.S. now, and it's also the hottest city in the U.S., major city at least. So heat really can take a toll on people here, even though it's a hot place and everyone knows that. And that occurs from any time from May through September and October. And June is typically the hottest month temperature-wise, but in July and August, when we have more moisture, it starts to feel a little more humid out, so that keeps the low temperatures a little warmer. So it never really cools off in the desert. So that heat can always be a concern anytime during the monsoon. Some of the other threats associated with the monsoon are related to thunderstorms. So a downburst wind gusts. So a lot of times you'll hear of microbursts that are associated with thunderstorms in the monsoon. All that is just really strong winds that are produced over a pretty small area, but they can be pretty intense wind gusts associated with that, sometimes 90, even 100 miles an hour. If it hits a populated area, it can cause quite a bit of damage. If it's in Tucson, Phoenix, El Paso, Albuquerque, any of those areas. A lot of times if it happens out in the open desert, it can knock down power poles and create problems that way. Another one of the threats is blowing dust here in southern and central Arizona. A lot of times, especially during the first half of the monsoon when it's still a little drier, that's when you'll start to see the more picturesque type dust storms that tend to move from southern Arizona into parts of central Arizona. So Phoenix is pretty prone to getting those dramatic dust storms. That can obviously cause a lot of travel problems. If you're out driving around, visibilities can be severely restricted in that. Of course, it's just not a very pleasant experience going through a dust storm. Another threat, lightning. With any thunderstorm, obviously lightning can be a deadly hazard. But during the monsoon, a lot of these storms are really electrified. So we can see some pretty impressive lightning counts with any of these thunderstorms during the monsoon. And then finally, flash floods. The Southwest has a lot of rugged terrain that can really enhance the flow of water. So if it rains pretty heavily over, say, the foothills north or east of Phoenix or around Tucson or any of the other major cities in the Southwest, that can lead to a flash flood threat pretty quickly too. And it may not even take much rain. Just 1 or 2 inches of rain over a small area can produce a pretty significant flash flood. So that's one of our biggest hazards that we're dealing with in the Southwest National Weather Service forecast offices. And then finally, there's a sixth threat that's not always considered a threat during the monsoon, but it's just as significant, and that's fire weather. And specifically, lightning-caused fires, especially during the early part of the monsoon. Before you get the really rich moisture in here, you have just enough moisture to produce thunderstorms, but they don't produce a lot of rain. They're still producing lightning. So when that happens, it's something that we refer to as dry lightning. So a lot of lightning will happen without a lot of rainfall. That can sometimes enhance the fire weather threat and cause lightning-caused fires. So when you're not getting a lot of rain with these thunderstorms, obviously those new fires aren't going to be put out very quickly. So those are the 6 threats that we really face every single monsoon season. And here in the next week or two, we'll start to see almost all of these threats really ramp up.
Yeah, I know for El Paso, we have 2 medium-sized fires and 2 small-sized fires going on in our area of responsibility.
Tim, I think I have this graphic showing the high splits from Albuquerque's area, and this shows about all the fires in some of the Southwest right now.
Sweet. Marissa has on the screen here is those lines represent where the wind is taking what would be at the ground level smoke. So you can see for today, all the fires that are occurring are kind of moving smoke up and to the northeast. So, and I know, Miss Jordan, I know that you guys have several fires going on. Do you know how many fires you guys are working over there?
I believe we have 6 going on right now. The biggest being, I think, just under 15,000 acres.
Is that I think it's called the Lizard Fire. Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated at who names these fires. So I know that what the Weather Service actually does, one of the neat things about the Weather Service is that if a fire gets large enough, it starts involving hundreds and hundreds of personnel, and it's a very, trying to fight that fire is a big deal. And while the fires are smaller, we will support the fire weather community from our offices. But once they get large enough, we'll actually dispatch a meteorologist to the fire, and that's called an incident meteorologist, and that is someone who is actually on site on the fire, and they give daily briefings. They work. They'll actually tour the fire line. They'll take weather observations. They'll set up weather stations in around the fire perimeter, and all that is to help the fire boss make good decisions on where to put personnel, how to keep people safe during the fire, and then to monitor things during operations as they're, building backlines and trying to contain the fire. Because as we've all seen in the past several years, that fighting fires is a very dangerous deal. And if you are not paying attention to the weather, weather is a really driving factor in those fires. And if you're not paying attention to it, you can get it can be a deadly situation. So I know it's very important. I know that it's something that all the weather offices, especially in the Southwest, but all across the Weather Service, we take very seriously when we're supporting that fire weather community. That's great information. Thanks for sharing all of that with us, Mr. Jared. Back to you, Miss Jordan. Real quick question for you. Starts June 15th, and Jared kind of touched on this. Are the thunderstorms just going to magically start there on June 15th?
So no, somebody might see some storms on June 15th, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the monsoon started. As they alluded to earlier, you have to have that wind shift to bring in the deeper moisture. So you can compare it to hurricane season. There are defined dates, start to end, but that doesn't mean we'll have storms every day. It comes and goes in waves. Sometimes you might get some breaks in activity, some down days, but other days might be more active. So the answer is maybe, but that doesn't mean the monsoon season has started.
I'm at home and you may hear my dogs bark. I apologize. Hey, that's very true. I've seen and I think Jared mentioned this, that the monsoon just kind of ebbs and flows. It kind of comes and goes. And I think let me see if I can show a picture here. Yeah, let me see. This is Albuquerque. What they look, this was the black line on the screen kind of shows what the average monsoon season is. And the red line shows you what the dew point temperature was in Albuquerque. And dew point is just another way to we measure moisture. And it's a way we measure moisture. And you can see how it kind of varies through the year. It just kind of comes up and then it does drop down. But over the summer, it doesn't just stay constant. It's moving up and down, up and down. So it is a good way to measure the amount of moisture. There, my dog's very loud. Hey, Marissa.
Yes.
She's very upset at something. Maybe she's upset about the not starting.
The
Now
heat.
my other dog's barking.
I didn't see that picture, Mr. Tim, so I don't know what was going on there. So Mr. Tim is muted. You're muted.
All right. So you couldn't see my picture?
No.
Now I'm looking at it. I apologize. Basically, it was a chart that showed the dew point temperature, which is the way we measure moisture, kind of ups and downs through the summer. It's like Jared said and like Jordan said, it's not a direct monsoon flow the entire time. I'll throw this question out to all of you guys. Anybody can jump in and answer it. Has the monsoon season or the monsoon flow just never developed or never quite got going? Does anyone have any on that?
Well, I'll be happy to chat about that one.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, here in northern Arizona, we normally see a very robust monsoon signal. Thunderstorms almost every day over the high terrain. But back in, I believe it was 2009, it was interesting. Normally, we average about 7 to 9 inches of moisture here in Flagstaff in the high country of Arizona. Back in 2009, we had what we called the non-soon because we had only about 2 inches of moisture through the entire monsoon season. Essentially, what we had was pretty strong westerly flow throughout the summer that kept the dry air over us. But the monsoon circulation was there. It would surge back every now and then, but that was one of the weakest monsoon seasons that I've ever seen here.
I know I've experienced a similar thing in El Paso a couple times. 2003 comes to mind, and really 1994, actually my first year in the Weather Service, when we had that blistering heat wave. We talked about we want a big area of high pressure kind of develop and move off over kind of the Midwest to kind of sweep that moisture into the area. And I think in that year, instead of the area of high pressure moving off, it sat right on top of the Southwest and just gave us brutal heat. I know for El Paso, that's when we hit 114, which is our all-time record high. I know people in Phoenix, you're going 114. That's not too bad. But for us, it was, I can remember, it was brutal kind of summer. So yes, it doesn't always work out, and some years are much better than other years, the way the monsoon flow occurs. Does anyone else have any quick comments there? Hearing none. I'll throw this question out to you guys. Oh, wait, we did have a question. And remember, you can tweet at us a question using the hashtag MAW2017. You can see it there in my lower third, or on the YouTube chat. You can ask. And we got another question here. It says, and maybe I don't know if Brian, if you can answer this, or maybe someone else can, but it says, how come they chose June 15th to define the season instead of the summer solstice?
Boy, that's a great question. It was the MIC in Phoenix, Tony Hafford, I think was one of the driving forces to defining a season to the monsoon, somewhat analogous to what they do with the hurricane season. It falls in the middle of the month, and normally precedes the monsoon. So I think what the thinking was at the time was that it would serve to also give us a period before the robust onset of the monsoon to talk about the hazards, to prepare as we can for the hazards during the monsoon season.
Very good. I know that we've defined it as starting as June 15th, but I know for like El Paso in New Mexico, usually the moisture, the monsoon moisture shows up that first week of July. I don't know how many people come up to me and tell me it always rains on July 4th. And it does seem striking that, and I've seen it over and over again. I don't know why, but on July 4th is when that surge of moisture seems to arrive. And I was looking at some research, and it looks like for southern New Mexico, the moisture kind of arrives in early July and mid-July up towards the northern part of New Mexico. So there is some truth that it seems like it's always raining on July 4th around, at least for El Paso. That seems like that's a common occurrence. It may not rain far, but so many people are out on the July 4th weekend or the holiday, and it's not uncommon, especially, you're out, lightning maybe off in the distance, and they associate, hey, it's raining. It may not be raining right where I am, but it is occurring. So it is funny, we talk about it ebbing and flowing, but at the same time, it is pretty consistent. Who wants to, how about this question? How much of annual precipitation do we get from the monsoon flow each year? Off the top of your head?
It varies a lot. I know at least in Arizona, southern Arizona gets a much larger percentage, maybe closer to 50% of their annual rainfall in some parts. We're here in the Phoenix area, rainfall is usually pretty spotty during the monsoon. I think for Phoenix proper, it's right around 20%. So we actually don't see a huge spike in precipitation in the Phoenix metro area proper from a monthly basis, at least, because we still get a lot of rain in a relative sense, at least during the cool season, during the winter. But some locations can get anywhere from 2 to 10 inches during the monsoon if they're just in the right spot. And as you get higher up in elevation, those areas tend to be more consistent with how much rainfall they get to. So at least for our area, it's pretty spotty down in the deserts.
Very good. Brian, how's the monsoon precipitation for you guys?
Yeah, for Flagstaff, it's about a third of our precipitation. For the lower elevations in northern Arizona, it's 30 to 40%.
Just so people are aware, real quickly, describe the area of responsibility for Flagstaff so people can kind of imagine that.
All of northern Arizona, basically from about 60 miles north of Phoenix to the Utah border and out to the New Mexico border, except for Mojave County. Las Vegas takes care of that for us.
Very good. Hey, Brian, can you describe, I should have done this at the beginning, describe the area that Phoenix covers?
You talking to me?
I'm
Brian?
sorry. I did say Brian. I apologize. Jared, can you describe the area that Phoenix covers?
Now, our area of responsibility is oriented more west to east. So we have the entire Phoenix metro area. We have parts of the higher terrain just east of Phoenix, which is Gila County in Arizona. And we go all the way out to southeast California, which is Imperial and eastern Riverside County out there. So our second major metro area, it's much smaller than Phoenix, but is Yuma, which is down by the international border along the Colorado River.
Very good, very good. Hey, Jordan, can you describe for me the area that Tucson covers?
Sure, we covered that tiny slice, or not tiny, that southeast corner of the state of Arizona. So we cover Cochise, Graham, Greenlee, Pima, and half of Pinal County. So we cover all the way up to the White Mountains, out to the deserts of western Arizona.
Very good. Hey, Miss Marissa, I threw up the map that you're showing to everybody. Can you describe the area that El Paso covers? And what are we looking at here on this map?
So this is a map of the National Weather Service and all the offices and the land that they cover. So like Jarrett and Brian and Jordan were saying their areas of coverage. El Paso, you can see right there in the yellow. We cover all of southern New Mexico and far west Texas. So we go as high as Cloudcroft, New Mexico. Truth or Consequences is kind of our border. And then all the way out to Hudspeth County. And we butt up against Midland and Tucson and Albuquerque as our partner offices.
Very good. So there's actually, for those of you that don't know, there's actually, I want to say 122 weather offices across the United States, all providing local weather information to the people in that area. I'm a big fan of weather is local, and it really helps to have familiar with the towns and the traditions and the roads and lakes and things in your area to help you better forecast the weather, but also just to better help you understand how that weather impacts you, because the monsoon season has a big impact on the area. And it just is a real benefit to understanding the population, how they communicate, like where are the lakes, where do people go out, where are they most exposed. So it's like I said, all weather's local, and it's the Weather Service is there to help protect people's lives and property, to help people make wise decisions. Now, we had a question came in on the YouTube chat. Basically, this person says, Shimmers, I wasn't able to attend any of the Skywarn sessions, and just so I'm clear, Skywarn is our spotter training classes that many weather offices do. But this person was wondering, are there any good resources to learn on their own? I'm not sure if she's referring to Skywarn, but I'm going to assume she wants to learn about they want to learn about the monsoon season. What are some resources? Does anybody know off the top of your head? I got one, but I'm going to see if anybody else knows any monsoon sources that they can kind of read up on what the monsoon season is.
I don't work at the Tucson office, but I know the Weather Service Tucson has a very in-depth page about the monsoon, so you can go to their website, weather.gov/Tucson. I believe it's linked directly from that page.
Hey, Marissa, look up Monsoon Tracker Tucson. I believe that is what it is called. Is that correct, Miss Jordan?
Yes, it is. We have that monsoon tracker page, and then we have like a more resource page. So it kind of breaks down the different patterns that lead up to the monsoon, and then different stats like that too.
Ah, very good. I'm going to wait for Miss Marissa to. She's tracking down the monsoon tracker page. That's a great page.
Is it the dew point tracker page? Is this what it looks like?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, if you go over to Gov and click on Tucson, then you'll find they'll have a link on there to their monsoon tracker. And this is just a way, they got a lot of different ways to track the monsoon information. You got monsoon statistics, dew point data, and a definition of what the monsoon is. And a lot of people think that we define the monsoon based on some magical dew point temperature. And I think at one point in the past, we used to do that we said, once we have 3 days in a row of 54-degree dew point temperatures, and again, dew point is just a way that we measure the amount of moisture in the air. Once you have 3 days in a row of dew points above a certain level, then the monsoon season has started. And that turns out to not be the best way to kind of track the monsoon or determine, because as we've seen, monsoon moisture kind of ebbs and flows, and it affects different regions a little differently. So we just, like Brian said, we just decided to go ahead and just say June 15th through September 30th is the monsoon season. And during that time frame, the monsoon flow may not be occurring. And actually, I've seen it, and Jared mentioned this, that it actually kind of wobbles back and forth. Sometimes it's not there at all. Sometimes I've seen it. You'll see this big flow of moisture goes into Arizona, while us in far west Texas and southern New Mexico, or New Mexico in general, are sitting kind of high and dry. And then that monsoon flow will just kind of drift over towards New Mexico, and then Arizona's kind of getting a break. So that monsoon flow, just basing it on the dew point temperature and the amount of moisture in the air isn't the best way to do it. So that's why we've kind of gone over to looking at just setting it as a season, and then it occurs sometime in there, and then it gives us an opportunity, like Brian mentioned, to kind of get a jump on things like we're doing this week, to talk about the different threats related to monsoon season, get everybody prepared. We don't want to scare people, certainly not, but we want you to be aware. I got a question for everybody, and I'll throw it out to everybody. which of the monsoon threats, and we mentioned 6 of them, we mentioned flash flooding, heat, downburst winds, blowing dust, and lightning, and then we also mentioned fire weather. Which of those threats during the monsoon seasons do you think on a whole can affect people?
Well, heat is the one that affects everyone. You can't really escape it. That's that's the one that lasts throughout the whole season. You rarely get breaks, especially down in the deserts. Thunderstorms as well. Those are a little more spotty, hit and miss, and those aren't necessarily every single day unless you're up in the higher terrain where they're more consistent. But heat for our area at least is probably the most deadly and the most consistent and prevalent threat.
I would agree with Jared. I think heat really is just the big money maker for us during the monsoon season. Of course, lightning and downburst winds are important here because of the dust, but that heat, no matter what, you can't escape it. And we're constantly trying to remind people about heat safety and to check on their neighbors just in case.
What's our slogan that we've got? I think we've got a couple this year, because every year it's very frustrating. Every year we have parents absentmindedly locking their kids in their cars and leaving them there. And I know we've got what's it?
Something about check the back
beat
seat.
The heat. Yeah, beat the heat, check the back seat. But there's another one this year, another saying. I'll try to look it up here in a second. But yeah, heat for sure is, and it's one of those underrated killers. Matter of fact, I believe I'm going to try to share my screen again. It wasn't apparently very successful last time. I'll try this again. I think I have some statistics. Yes. Hopefully, Marissa, can you see my screen?
No.
Man, I don't know what the deal is. All right. Why don't you look up weather fatalities?
Oh, it's there. It's there.
There we go.
Okay. Don't you love the internet? Okay, so good. You can see the weather fatalities, and believe it or not, if you look at the 30-year average, guess what? Heat is the #1 killer in the United States. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Heat is a lot like lightning, that it unfortunately picks up its victims one at a time, one here, one there. So it doesn't make big news unless it's a big heat event in like a large metropolitan area. I know like Chicago has had some devastating heat waves that have killed numerous people. But usually heat and lightning to its also in a very similar way. It's one person here, one person there, and you never realize the devastating effects that heat can have, especially on elderly people who are on a fixed income. They don't maybe want to run their air conditioners or their coolers, and the house just gets hotter and hotter, and that takes a drain on people as day after day after day. And during the summer, we can see when we have the monsoon that the low temperatures at night, some things that do help people is when we get that cooler temperatures at night. But when we really start to ramp up the heat, and you're talking, for El Paso, we're only getting low temperatures in the upper 70s to near 80. I know in Phoenix, when you're getting low temperatures, you guys during the heat is like in the 90s, things like that?
Yeah, it's pretty common every year now to have a stretch where we have lows in the 90s.
So that's just devastating, because you just don't get a chance to recover. I think at this time of the year, right now, if you walk outside in the morning, you go, oh, that feels nice. And it just gives your body, gives your house a chance to recover. But when it's so hot, there's just no break from it, and it just wears on people. And like I showed on that graphic, it tends to, especially affects the elderly and people who just have trouble getting out. It has a heat chart. So this is NOAA's, the Weather Service's heat index, and it's a combination of relative humidity and temperature. Basically, when the relative humidity is up, or when the amount of moisture is higher in the air, it's harder for your body to cool itself down. So when there's more humidity in the air, when we sweat, that's a cooling process, actually. You know, if you get out of a swimming pool on a summer day and you get out and it's cold, that's because the water is evaporating off your arms. Well, when we sweat, that's a cooling process. And when there's more moisture in the air, it's much harder for the evaporation to occur, which means your body cannot cool itself down. So when there's more moisture in the air and when it's hotter, it's much harder on the body, and the Weather Service has kind of developed this heat index as a way to kind of give people an idea of when they should be careful when you get a combination of a lot of moisture in the air and very warm temperature. So if you have a temperature of just 100 degrees, but the relative humidity is at 50%, it feels like it's 118 degrees. And people just need to be aware of that and take caution when they're out and about. So again, that heat is a sneaky thing, and we need to just be very careful about it. So definitely, we were talking about heat is the one that can affect the biggest area.
Can I mention one thing about heat too?
Please do.
You know, there's a joke nationwide that in Phoenix and Arizona during the summer, it's a dry heat, so people can cope with it. During the monsoon, we actually have periods where the dew points get pretty high. So they can be in the 50s and 60s during the day even. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a dry heat once you have dew point levels that high. And the heat index chart you showed there, that's influenced by the amount of moisture in the air too. So that's kind of one misconception. This time of year in June, it is a dry heat. But once we get into July and August, we start to see a little more humidity. So that can make the heat problems a little more severe than normal.
Hey, Brian, do a lot of people have air conditioning up in your area?
You know, I'd say probably less than half up here in the Flagstaff area actually have air conditioning. You know, in the lower elevations in the valley areas, of course, yeah, they'll need it there. But up in Flagstaff, no. And, you know, it can get into the mid-90s up here. But the advantage we have in the high country is it almost always cools off overnight. So that deadly, persistent heat doesn't affect us here in the high country, but certainly in the Verde Valley, out in the Northeast, you bet, certainly can.
Hey, just real quickly, what elevation is Flagstaff at there?
7,000 feet.
Wow, you guys are way up there. And then kind of go off subject a little bit. You get plenty of snow. Is that not correct?
We do, about 8 feet of snow a year.
8 feet of snow, and that's in Arizona, people. That's very impressive. Don't you wish you could capture that and hold on to it all year round?
Right now, yeah.
Well, I know that in El Paso and across New Mexico, we talked about air conditioning, but a lot of people, and I'll ask Jared, they have coolers. We don't have actual air conditioners. We use something that's called a cooler, and it's actually ingenious. When I first moved to El Paso, I was like, what are these big boxes on everybody's house? And basically, it's a big box that we pump water up to, and there's some kind of membrane. Usually, it can be straw or it can be some kind of cardboard, and the water kind of trickles through that, and then we draw air through it. And as the air goes through it, it evaporates and actually makes things cooler in the house. But once the monsoon moisture, again, since it's an evaporative process, like right now, Marissa, what's our relative humidity right now in El Paso? I don't know it off the top of my head.
I don't know. Hold on.
Okay, I'll let you look that up. But I know that like right now it's very dry here. So the air coming out of my cooler, it feels like I opened the door of the refrigerator. It is very cold. But once the monsoon moisture moves in, it starts to raise. Jared mentioned it raises that dew point. And now my cooler doesn't work as efficiently, and I'm not able to cool my house as well. Hey, Jared, I think people in Phoenix, don't they have a combination, both coolers and air conditioners?
Yeah, I think a lot of the older construction, the older houses have swamp coolers still, or evaporative coolers. They're becoming much less common now for the reasons you stated. You know, in June, this time of year when it's really dry still, they're pretty effective. But once we get into July and August, when the dew points start to get in the 50s and 60s, they really become much less effective. So when you have days when the temperatures are 105, 110, even 115, and your dew points are in the 50s and maybe even 60s, you're really not evaporating a lot of that air. So all you're really doing is just making your house more humid and more uncomfortable rather than cooling it off due to evaporation.
That is very true. Marissa, what was that magical
0.
relative humidity number?
0.
0? Okay. Probably not quite 0, but it's what, like
Oh,
one?
negative 0.3.
Wow. That's very low. So basically it's so dry. What's our dew point temperature?
31.5.
Wow.
Is that
So,
what you just asked me?
and then
Yeah.
when you combine that with an air temperature of right at, I think we're at 98, 99, almost 100, that gives you very low relative humidity. So like I said, I'm sitting at home right now and I feel just cool air waffling over me.
Tim, I looked at the wrong number. Our RH is 12. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's kind of
I
low.
was like, wait, that seems so low.
Like 0. I
Sorry, I
had an
looked at the
instrument
wrong number quickly.
That's okay. So 12%. So that's pretty low. Again, though, that speaks to one of the other problems that we mentioned during the start of monsoon season is fire weather. I know today was very dry. RHs in the single digits for min RHs, and we had a fair amount of wind across the area. So I know several offices, Albuquerque, I know Tucson, I know we had what we call red flag warnings, and that's just to let everybody know it's not a good idea if you're trying to burn some trash today, if you have to do some kind of grinding or anything that creates sparks, be very careful because fires on a day like today can spread very easily because of the wind and the very dry conditions. And then that's one of the threats that we see, especially at the beginning of the monsoon season. And we get these big fires and sometimes they get started and they'll burn tens of thousands of acres. And really the fire weather community, a lot of times all they can do is manage them and try to contain them, but they don't really get put out until that monsoon moisture kind of flows in towards the end of June into July, and we get some rains on top of the fire that can really help get some of those fires put out. I wanted to see if we had, somebody else mentioned, Judy mentioned over in Tucson that they've had problems, and we have problems like this everywhere, and maybe Brian can mention this. People who go out hiking and they're just not aware of the temperature and everything, and they actually are overcome by the heat. And unfortunately, I think every year we see some hikers who lose their lives because of the heat, the way the heat affects people.
Yeah, we see that every year up in northern Arizona, especially for those that hike down into the Grand Canyon. Okay, of course, it's very warm at the base of the Grand Canyon. A lot of people stand on the south rim where it's 80, 85 degrees. It feels great, but they are completely unaware that it's well over 100 degrees down in the depths of the Grand Canyon and get caught off guard by the extreme temperatures and the difficulty of the hiking.
Big difference, if I remember right, between even the south rim of the Grand Canyon and the north rim. There's an elevation difference, and then there's a temperature difference there, right?
You bet. Typically, the difference between the south rim and the river is about 22 degrees this time of year.
Wow.
And the north rim is about I think 5 degrees cooler than the south rim.
Wow,
that's
that
up
is
over
impressive.
8,000 feet.
Wow. I did want to remind everyone, if you've got a question, you can tweet at us using the hashtag M as in mother, A as in apple, W as in wheelbarrow, 2017. So that's MAW 2017. Or like a lot of people are doing, they're hopping on the chat. I wanted to say a shout out to Terry and some of the others who are in the chat. We got Frances. She thanked us for doing this hangout and providing the information. And it's our pleasure. I'm glad we're able to do it. We want to help you just be ready, be aware of the potential problems that we have during the monsoon season. I'll throw out another question that I have here to you guys. What is the area of the monsoon flow? Is it just hang around the international border, or does it surge way in and all the way into Canada? Does anyone have an idea of how far it goes as far as that moisture plume?
It can go as far north as the Intermountain West, so up into the northern Rockies even. It's a much shorter period of time when they actually get the monsoonal moisture up there compared to down here in the Southwest. But yeah, the monsoon moisture can affect the entire western United States at some times during the year.
Yeah, the big historic floods in Fort Collins several years ago were a result of a big monsoon surge.
Yeah, I know that for Colorado, Grand Junction, Boulder, it's more of a surgy kind of thing where it just kind of it comes and then it gets cut off and then it'll come back again. You're exactly right. I've seen that happen, and actually to somewhat the same extent it happens to us. Like I mentioned before, you'll see it on the satellite. You'll see it on our computer models. It'll just be a big surge of moisture, and it seems to favor. It'll go into Arizona, and then a few days later, it'll shift over to New Mexico. Then it'll shift right on back, and there's just this. We call it. I call it the moisture plume, and it's just this area of enhanced moist air. And again, that moisture is what fuels these thunderstorms, and it's the winds, that seasonal change in the winds that draws that moisture in. Once we get the moisture in place, then it's just a matter of we all have, all of our area responsibilities. We have that topography. Brian mentioned they're up at 7,000 feet. I know in our area we have a mountain that goes almost to 10,000 feet, Sierra Blanca. Albuquerque has a lot of topography. Tucson, we all have topography, and we always start that the heating on top of the topography is one of the best ways to get thunderstorms going, and that pops up those thunderstorms. And then once they get going, they start to move down into the lowlands. And we get those outflow boundaries. And basically an outflow boundary is just a big gust of wind out of these thunderstorms, but those act like new lifting mechanisms, and that's what you need to get another storm going. Is that wedge of air coming out from these thunderstorms lifts up, starts firing off more thunderstorms, and it's a process that kind of gets going. And actually in El Paso, and I think that this works similarly in Phoenix, and Jared can mention this, but I know that we'll watch the convection start on all the mountains around us, and we usually have mountains northeast of us, southwest of us, southeast of us, and northeast of us. So it's like the 4 points, and they'll start, and then they all work into the terrain. And El Paso and Las Cruces are usually kind of at the middle of this kind of circle. And it's interesting, during the night, you'll watch them all kind of close in on us. So it's not uncommon for El Paso to see thunderstorms after 10 o'clock as these areas of rain move into the area. And I think stuff working off for Tucson and for Phoenix, you get a similar kind of effect off of the Mogollon Rim, that you can almost every night you see the same thing happening again. Is that right?
Yeah, the Phoenix area, at least, some long-time meteorologists here joke that there's a Pac-Man effect where north of the Phoenix area, we have a lot of higher terrain areas up towards Flagstaff and the Mogollon Rim, as you mentioned. So thunderstorms will develop along the Mogollon Rim almost every day during parts of the monsoon. And sometimes those will move down towards the southwest, towards the Phoenix area. We also have mountains to the east and southeast, and a lot of times we'll get storms down from Tucson's area that will move up towards the northwest, towards us. So yeah, they can really come from any direction, especially northeast or southeast of us. I know Tucson, I don't want to speak for them too much, but they're a little bit closer to the higher terrain. They have the Catalina Mountains, I believe, right there where Mount Lemmon is and so on. And so they can actually get thunderstorms develop pretty close to their city, and it doesn't take much to move those down into the lower elevations. So it's a little bit different for them, and that's probably why they get a little more rainfall than we do as well.
Does it sound about right, Miss Jordan?
Oh yeah, sounds good. The storms can move in any direction any day, really. You have to just kind of see what the flow looks like on the morning sounding, then base it from there. See which way its storms are going to move during the day.
Very good. Miss Judy is in here asking. She says that she lives in Midtown Tucson, and on a clear day, she can look south and see just the huge storms building. It's a good question. How far can we see clouds here in the Southwest? Because I grew up in the Midwest in Oklahoma, and on a summer day, you're lucky to see like 4 or 5 miles. There's such soupiness in the air. Here in the Southwest, on average, how far can we see? Does anyone have an idea? Can kind of throw out a number there?
I know some of the bigger thunderstorms, the higher thunderstorm tops, you can see for well over 100 miles. From Phoenix area, for instance, we can see down near Tucson when there are thunderstorms close to that area. So I would imagine from Tucson, you could probably see storms down northern Mexico, closer to the international border, for really tall.
I know that I've seen here in El Paso on occasion. I've seen, I think the furthest storm I've seen is like 150 miles away, and that kind of took some. It was a good strong storm. It was way up there, poking up over the horizon, and it was at sunset, so the sun was just catching it just right. But yeah, we have some visibility out here, and you can see things a long way off. And I think that sometimes can skew people's perception because they can see these thunderstorms of that are away, and in their mind it's raining, there's a thunderstorm, not necessarily again happening where they are, but they associate it's raining, so it rains a lot. Like I said, they always see it on July 4th, and everyone says it rains every July 4th, and it's not true, but it does rain. We do actually measure rain about every 1 in 3 July 4th, but there's usually a thunderstorm out there somewhere on July 4th. So very good. Let's see. I got another. Oh, Terry had a question here. What particular combination of weather does it take to produce storms? So she's asking. I've mentioned moisture as one of the elements. Miss Jordan, what are the ingredients that you need to get a thunderstorm?
So you have to have some form of lift to really kick that off. So fronts or any type of moisture coming in, like you said. Mountains, they provide a source of lift too, so oftentimes we'll see the monsoon start up in the elevated areas first, because they have a little bit more ingredients up there. So wind shear is an element that you need to have to make the storms a little more organized and they last a little bit longer. So if you have good wind shear during the day, storms could last maybe through the night or into the night at least, and helps them more organized.
Exactly. We need like she mentioned, you need that lift, and that lift can take the form of many different things. You got outflow boundaries moving, like I mentioned earlier, from these thunderstorms, a cold front. Every now and then, the dry line in the early part of the season will back into Albuquerque and El Paso's area of responsibility. But anything that can give that lift, if you imagine these, the outflow boundary can kind of present itself as, especially for Phoenix, as these haboobs, these big dust clouds. That's essentially a big giant outflow boundary that's kicked up a lot of dust, and it's come out of the bottom of the thunderstorm. But you get anything that gets us any kind of lift, where you get that lift, it the atmosphere, and you get those the water and the water vapor condensing, and you get the thunderstorms developing, is what you need. So you need lift, you need a little instability. Sometimes we get a little help in the atmosphere. We'll get a little storm system in the upper part of the atmosphere that'll move across. I know that in 2006, when El Paso had a devastating flood, we had an area of low pressure over New Mexico, and Miss Marissa has a great graphic here of how you need moisture, instability, and lift to get you your thunderstorms. So if you're missing those, it's a lot harder to get thunderstorms. You can be down on the moisture and still have plenty of instability and lift, and you'll only have a few storms and things like that. But it's a combination of those moisture, lift, and instability that gets us our thunderstorms. A lot of times the instability in the Southwest can be, let's say, on the weak side of things, or maybe the lift is a little weak, but we make up for it with that moisture, and then the differential heating with the mountains and things like that can really help us get those thunderstorms going during the afternoon, and then they work off the mountains and head down into the lowlands for the evening hours. We've been doing this for about 54 minutes. I wanted to check Twitter again. I don't think anyone's commented on our Twitter feed. Nope, not yet. But we are getting great comments, and I want to thank everyone's comments on on the YouTube channel. Everything's going very well. Yeah, go ahead.
I think there were a couple of questions that we missed a little farther up on the YouTube chat. One was, what is Arizona's all-time record high temperature? I can answer that one real quick. 128 degrees in Lake Havasu City. That was back on June 29th, 1994. So,
hey, what a surprise, 1994.
Yeah, exactly. Along the Colorado River Valley, that's the lowest elevation area in the state of Arizona. So that also tends to be the hottest. So a lot of times you'll see 120 plus during the summer on the hottest days. But yeah, that's why 128 is the record there in Lake Havasu. For Phoenix, it's 122, I believe. So you get hot anywhere here.
I know in El Paso it's 114. Don't mean to put you on the spot, Miss Jordan. Do you know Tucson's highest temperature ever?
I don't off the top of my head, but I might could look it up.
No problem. Hey, Brian, how about you? Do you know Flagstaff's highest temperature ever? Brian's having a bandwidth issue. So, hey, Brian, I just asked, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you know Flagstaff's highest temperature ever?
96 or 97. I believe it's 97 now.
97. Not bad. Not bad. I'm going to have to visit Flagstaff sometime.
Oh, yeah. Come on by.
Did you find it, Jordan? I was able to find it. I think I found for Tucson was oh gosh, I just lost it. 115, 117.
117 on June 26, 1990.
That's also the same day as Phoenix too.
Yeah, there you go. Wow. So like we mentioned, heat. Okay, I'm going to wrap things up here. Again, the threats we're going to be talking about. Remember, everyone, we'll be doing these Hangouts all week long at the same time. And each night we're going to focus on one threat. So I want to say tomorrow is heat. The next day is, now I've forgotten. I think it's downburst winds. On Wednesday is going to be talking about blowing dust and the haboobs. Thursday will be lightning, and Friday we'll be talking about flash floods. So each day we're going to try to have a guest in, an expert guest. Not that we are not experts, but we're going to try to have someone who deals directly with that threat on their day-to-day in their job, and we're going to just have a nice discussion about those. So be thinking of your questions and be ready for those each night at the same time. Check your local weather office's social media channel for the link that you can join those Hangouts and watch and just gather some information as we go through Monsoon Awareness Week. And it's interesting that this week, Monsoon Awareness Week, we're going to start the week as a kind of pre-monsoon week, and then we're going to end the week and start it. So it's kind of exciting. All righty. Well, I don't see. Oh, Terry. Terry said, "Thanks so much for the information. We are glad that we can do it. So I'm glad you could join us." I'm going to run down the line here. Just some closing remarks that anybody has as we wrap up the introduction to monsoon season 2017, and as we look forward to this week, trying to inform people and give people information to keep themselves safe as we move through the monsoon season this year. So, Brian, real quickly, you have any closing remarks?
Boy, enjoy the monsoon, but be smart, be safe out there. It's the high country that people normally get into trouble around here when they're climbing our mountains and get threatened by the thunderstorms. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you so much. Jared, do you have any closing remarks?
What Brian said, just enjoy it. I can provide some spectacular thunderstorms, dust storms, at least here in Arizona, that are pretty scenic looking, but it's also a dangerous time of year too. There can be some hazards that you may not even expect, such as heat. So just pay attention to some of the products we're issuing here from the National Weather Service and just stay safe.
Very good. Ms. Jordan, any last thoughts from you?
This will actually be my first monsoon season, so I'm really looking forward to experiencing it. So as everybody else said, pay attention to the products you send out and stay aware.
Very good. Ms. Marissa, my coworker,
yes.
Any last words from you?
I'd agree with everyone. Just make sure you're monitoring all of our social media feeds and our website. We're putting out those warnings and advisories and watches and stuff for a reason. So we hope to keep life and property safe by doing so. So enjoy the monsoon.
Yes, I forgot to mention, and maybe one of you guys, if you're on the calls, one of the other calls, I would like to go over, because I think a lot of people get confused with watch, warning, and advisory. And those are the three main products that we have in the Weather Service to let people know about the bad weather. And I think a lot of people get them confused. What's the difference between a watch and a warning? So maybe on another call, we'll go over that. It's a little teaser. You'll have to tune back in for those definitions. Of course, you can always just look them up on the Weather Service website. But like they said, I want everyone to enjoy the Southwest. It's a beautiful part of the country, but during the monsoon season, it can be hazardous. Just keep an eye to the sky. I'm a big fan of lightning. I love it during the monsoon season. Again, with that visibility, I can see lightning for dozens and dozens of miles. And we've got some great lightning photographers around the Southwest. I know there's some great ones in Phoenix and in Tucson and here in El Paso. They take some great pictures, and it's always great to see on social media these great lightning pictures. So I'm a big fan of lightning. So I tell you, you go through the dry months of March and April, and if anybody's joining from another part of the country, March and April are pretty wet months for most of the country, but in the Southwest, it is dry as a bone. That's our dry season. And you can go weeks with I'm not even saying precipitation, no clouds. So it'll be very nice to see some cumulus clouds, some big puffy white clouds back in the sky here in a few weeks with the rain coming out of them, because we do like the rain. It's very beneficial. It's just a very great time of year. And I, like they said, encourage everyone to get out and enjoy the great things that we have in the Southwest, but keep an eye to the sky and be aware of all the monsoon threats. And we'll be covering them all. Like I said, each day this week, we're going to be talking about heat. We're going to be talking about downburst winds. We're going to be talking about lightning. We're going to be talking about dust, blowing dust, and we'll be talking about flash floods all this week. So please join us each day at the same time. Check your office's social media channels for the links. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank you for Mr. Brian from Flagstaff, Jared from Phoenix, Jordan from Tucson, and Miss Marissa from El Paso. I'm also from El Paso. I'm Tim Bryce. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you and everybody else tomorrow, and just enjoy the weather and have a good night.